Let's get started. Today's session is one of my favorites this year, and that's because I'm very happy to introduce my good friend Nikhil Jaisinghani, who's one of the co-founders of Mera Gao Power, one of the first microgrid operators who managed to scale their operation in North India, where I do a lot of my own research. Nikhil and I go back a long way. My second visit to India in 2013 was to do some work together with Mera Gao Power, understanding the model, its impact, how it works, and we've since then kept in touch and had a lot of very interesting conversation about the challenge of increasing electricity access and giving people the kind of energy they need in rural India. So I'm very excited to hear what the latest is and Nikhil's thinking on this area. He's an experienced entrepreneur. I'm an academic, so we come at this from very different perspectives. I see many students here who are either in my current energy access class or took it last year, so I think we'll get a very interesting and complementary perspective today. What we're going to do today is we're going to ask Nikhil to give his presentation. That's going to be about 30 minutes or so. After that, I'm just going to open it for questions. I'll probably use my prerogative as the chair to ask the first question. Then after that, we'll hear from the students, we'll have a conversation, and we should be done by, let's say, 1:45 or so. Okay, thank you. It's all yours. Thanks a lot.
Thanks for the introduction, and thanks for inviting me on. I appreciate it. And thank all of you for coming to listen to me today. Hopefully it's useful. I'm here to talk about off-grid energy and the work, a little bit about the work I'm doing, but less about the work I'm doing, more about the sector as a whole. I'm going to start by talking about the power sector, and want to make one point to start. The power sector is the world's largest nonprofit sector in the world. It is bigger than all the philanthropic activities, bigger than all the NGOs combined. It loses money. Hand over fist year after year. It's never figured out as a sector how to make money. And what I mean by that is while there are private sector companies in the space, from end to end, generation, transmission, distribution to the end customer, the customer pays less all the time than it costs to do all those activities and get them the power. And the shortfall is made up by government. So the government is not only responsible for making up the shortfall in the power sector as a whole, it's also responsible for paying the profit margins of the private sector companies operating within that sector. So it's not a great deal. I'm not busting on private enterprise here at all, but it is a money-losing initiative for governments. It requires a lot of subsidies, and let me just go into some specific examples. In Africa right now, it costs about $8,000 to extend the distribution lines 1 kilometer, and that's the lowest. Those are the thinnest distribution lines you can put in. It costs on average across all countries in Africa about $8,000 a kilometer. If you're putting in thicker lines, it gets up to as much as $26,000 a kilometer. Now, if you're going in Africa with sparse population densities, you might end up going 5 kilometers, that's $40,000 to get to the nearest community, and you might electrify 10 households. That's $4,000, I've done my math correct, $4,000 per household to connect, and that's just the distribution cost. Doesn't include the transformers, the household connections, the metering. $4,000 a household, and that household might pay $5 a month, right? Now you're going to end up paying costs to collect that $5 a month. You have operating costs and so on. Let's say you make $2 a month in gross profit off that customer, $24 a year, and you're going to have to pay back $4,000. Who's paying for that? It's not the customer, right? Because by the time you've paid that back, you have to replace it. You probably have to replace it way before it's been paid back. And in fact, in most cases in rural portions of developing countries, the operating cost exceeds the revenue. So you're not even making that gross profit. You're losing money on operations. You're never going to pay back that capital cost required to connect that village to a grid. So that creates a very large financial burden for governments, right? So the distribution companies, which are often public but sometimes private, they have a few priorities or preferences. They're still trying to make as much money as possible. First off, they have to be subsidized. We just covered that. They have to be heavily subsidized. Second off, they love to serve urban customers for some of the reasons I just mentioned. The distribution cost per customer are a lot lower. you get to an urban center, and you have 1,000, 2,000, 5,000, 10,000 customers all within a pretty small geographic location. The cost per customer of connecting them is a lot lower. And the third thing they love to serve high-end customers, people who are going to consume a lot of power. People who are richer, they can afford televisions, fans, refrigerators, AC, whatever it is that they want, they can afford it. That means they're consuming that infrastructure that they put in to connect that household is lower per cost per household because it's in an urban area, and then they're consuming more, which means that the distribution company is getting more revenue per customer as well. So that payback period is a lot shorter in urban areas, particularly high-end urban households. So that's kind of where the power sector starts, and so there's the question is still, you know, you guys are at sites and you're looking at energy access. We don't want to just exclude the rural areas and rural populations. We don't want to not provide them with power. So how do we do it? The one way is just increase the subsidies. Just make the subsidies that much greater so that you can do it. And then that happens a little bit, but then ends up that the distribution companies tend not to get what they're promised from governments, and so they're reluctant. There's a few. So we've talked about the rural areas. The other thing about rural areas is that the customers, the households are generally poor, right? So they're even if they promise to pay, they may not. If they don't pay and you want to go collect, you have to go to those households to collect. You can put in prepaid metering and so on, but you're still going to get less money from them than you will from urban customers. A number of companies have decided they have a solution, and they're going to figure this out, or they want to figure this out. They've got a start on figuring this out. What, in your eyes, having heard this, what might be a solution to this? How might you do this in a way that you can actually get access to electricity in rural areas, given those shortcomings? How would you get to those off-grid communities?
You can have the communities buy in somehow and help reduce it themselves.
They could buy in, so they could pay more. Basically, you can say the government's not going to pay for it, the customer will pay for it, right? That's one solution. That's certainly one that a number of companies have taken on. They're saying, well, look, the public grid is providing heavily subsidized power. It's actually worth more than that to customers. We'll provide what it actually costs to serve them. See how many customers are willing to pay. In Off-Grid Africa, a World Bank paper has found, or estimated, let me not say found, but estimated that off-grid African households, only 25% of them can afford subsidized grid electricity. So if you were to extend the grid to an off-grid community in sub-Saharan Africa, now sub-Saharan Africa is big, but if you were to extend it, the chances are you'd only get 25% of the households in that community connected, because only 25% could afford it. And that's subsidized power. So if you remove the subsidies, now you're making it that much more expensive. Johannes, you did some work in India where you were also looking at villages that were grid connected and found that less than half the households were connected to the grid, even though the grid was there. And one of the reasons for that is cost. The cost is already really high when you add all these subsidies in. So now you remove the subsidies and the price just gets that much higher. So there are some communities where it will work, but there are still a lot of communities and a lot of households where that won't work for. What would be another solution? Decentralized generation is going to be part of it, yeah. It's still expensive, but you at least remove the distribution cost, right? That $8,000 I was mentioning per kilometer, you get rid of that. If you're generating the power in the village, then you've got the village, you got the power right there. You don't have to distribute it. You don't have to deal with transmission. So you've got a lot lower capital cost per customer right there with decentralized energy and distributed, decentralized off-grid renewable energy projects within communities. So that's absolutely one of the ways to do it. And that's what a lot of companies are trying to do. There's some that will do that and still say we need subsidies, and will go to the government and say, instead of paying the distribution companies, the local distribution companies pay us. So that's another model where you have decentralized energy, but you're still trying to get the subsidies. And then there's another way, which is a way that we at Mera Gao Power decided to approach this. And in order to illustrate that, I'm going to do a little exercise. How many of you have been to Great Falls before? Okay, less than half. All right. So for those you don't know, it's a park not too far from here, national park. Let us imagine there are a few households in the park, but let us imagine that you just got super lucky, and someone said, "I built a cabin in Great Falls. You can have it. You can live there." And you're like, "All right, this is awesome." You go out there, and the cabin's beautiful, surroundings are beautiful. You go in and realize there's no electricity. So you go back to the person who sold it to you or gave it to you and say, "Well, what do I do about this?" And they say, "Don't worry, I'll set you up. But instead of charging you for electricity, I'm going to charge you for electricity services. You just tell me what you're willing to pay, and I'll provide you with these services." So imagine that you have this cabin now, and you have this offer, and you have to decide what do you want? What are you willing to pay for lighting, right? What would you pay for lighting? What would you pay for phone charging? What would you pay for a fridge? What would you pay for a fan in order to live in this house? What would you pay them on a monthly basis? All right, so let's start at the bottom. What would you pay to have a fan that operates, let's say, 12 hours a day? Small fan, nothing extreme here, but just you, so you're okay. 12 hours a day for a fan. What would you pay per month? Any answer? There's no wrong answer. I can't calculate the correctness of this here. So you just tell me a number that makes sense to you.
$15.
$15.
Wow. $15 a month?
15?
A month?
A month.
Okay.
All right. So that's approximately $1 a kilowatt hour. It's pretty good. The grid right now, if you're in DC, you're paying probably 7-8 cents a kilowatt hour. So you're paying a pretty good rate there for the fan. But it's $15. What about a fridge? It's going to run 24 hours a day. Say it's a full fridge. You got to have somewhere to put your food, your beer. You got to have something to do at night. So you got to have your fridge that's there to keep you fed. What are you going to pay for that per month? More or less than the fan? More. How much more?
Can we lower our fan?
Well, what would you pay for the fridge? Regardless of the 15 for the fan, what would you pay for the fridge?
I mean, it would probably be one of the more important items to me. So I would prioritize it, but I don't know what the right price is, just based on this. But let's say $8 for the fridge.
$8 for the fridge. Okay,
we
what
have
would
to lower
you
the
prefer?
fan.
All right. We'll for the sake of that, we'll put in $5 for the fan and $8 for the fridge. So you're gonna pay 1 cent a kilowatt hour for
Okay,
the
maybe
fridge.
$10 for the
All
fridge.
right. We'll put it up to 10, but let's move on. All right, so now let's start with lights. Let's say we got some standard lights. I'm not even going to give you really bright lights. I'm going to give you some 40-watt lights. All right, 40-watt incandescent lights. I'm going to give you 4 of them, and you can only run it for 6 hours a night. 4 lights, 6 hours a night, 40 watts. What are you going to pay for that per month?
$3.
3?
Yeah.
So if you didn't pay $3, if I said it would be 4, you'd live in the dark.
No. $4, I guess.
How much?
4. If that's what you're offering. I would rather not live in the dark.
You'd rather not live in the dark. All right, 4. All right. Well, if it was for an incandescent light, would anyone pay more than $4 a month? You'd live in the dark for 5. If I was offering 5, you'd live in the dark.
Are we in the summer or the winter?
Let's say you're gonna sign an annual contract. All right, but no one's paying 10. All right, okay. All right, so if I do an incandescent light at 40 watts, you're paying 8 cents. But I'm not promising you a 40-watt light. I'm just promising you a light that's as bright as a 40-watt light. I can save my cost as the one who's providing that service to you by switching to LED. You get the same light quality, but I'm going to spend less on the energy. You're still going to pay me $4, and now you'll be paying me 67 cents a kilowatt hour. That sounds a lot better. Now, how about phone charging? How many people have phones? Yeah, I thought. What would you pay to keep it charged? 10. How much you paying for phone service, by the way? What's your monthly bill for your phone?
It's like 35.
35. All right, and so relative to that, you paid, is 10 the right number for phone charging? You give up your phone, guys charging you 12? What's the price? What's that maximum price? You don't have to worry. We're not actually entering into negotiation. I'm not going to walk out of here and say, you said. So you just, what's the actual number? What's the maximum you paid? If I said it was that much, you'd be, God, that's kind of expensive, but I'm on the fence. What's that number? What's the number where you'd be on the fence?
$23.
$23, right. All right. Even if it's 10, even if it's 10, let's go back 10, you're still paying me $22 a kilowatt hour, right? Compared to 1 cent a kilowatt hour for your fridge. So if I was an entrepreneur, what might I do to try and maximize my revenue per kilowatt hour if I was serving people who lived off grid?
Set up mobile charging systems and not put fridges in there.
Not put fridges, certainly, yes. In fact, that's exactly the point. And the two that you guys are willing to pay the most for are lighting and phone charging. And so you would start up not an electricity business, but a lighting and phone charging business. Say, I will provide you with lighting and phone charging for a set amount of money. And that way, instead of paying the subsidized price of, in the US, 6-7 cents a kilowatt hour, you're paying 10 times that for LEDs and, ridiculous amount more for mobile phone charging, right? That's a way to make money without having to ask for the subsidies and without having to charge your customers a tremendous amount of money. Because we're not charging any more for the phone charger than the fridge, but the price per kilowatt hour is so much higher. So there's 3 options, just in summary. You're probably going to do decentralized energy if you're going to serve an off-grid community. But one option is to say, I'm going to just charge my customers a lot more. I'm going to charge them, they can use as much power as they want. I'm going to charge them 50 cents a kilowatt hour, and that's just going to be that, and they're going to pay for it. Maybe they'll have a fixed fee of $10 a month, whatever it is, but that's going to be that. I'm going to charge the customer more. The other is, I'm going to keep the price of the customer low, and I'm going to get the government to make up the balance, just like they do for the national grid. That's option number 2. Option number 3 is say, I don't trust the government, and I don't think my customers can pay that fee, so I'm going to focus on the services that we can provide in the most energy efficient way possible that our customers are willing to pay the greatest amount for, and I can do that in an unsubsidized way. Now, as you may have guessed, that's what we have chosen at Mera Gao Power. We've chosen to work without government subsidies and providing lower than grid cost power, but for priority energy services.
Excuse me,
Yeah.
are you saying that the priority energy services are LEDs and mobile chargers instead of fridge?
Yes. That's what our
What is
customers
that?
prioritize.
What is that in?
And in fact, when you look at the units, what you're willing to pay per unit of power, you also prioritize it. I didn't make up these numbers. That's why I asked you guys. Because if I put them up there, you would say, you doctored this. I didn't doctor it. You get it. You guys did. You guys told me these numbers. You guys prioritize lighting and phone charging. And our customers do too. It's not unusual. And that's why when you look in the off-grid energy space, you see a lot of solar lantern companies, a lot of kits that are lighting and phone charging. This is exactly why. If you're not getting subsidies and you want to provide power to rural households, you got to focus on what's most meaningful to the people you're serving. And people are willing to pay the most. It's not just you guys. It's the same thing in off-grid India and off-grid Africa. People who are willing to pay the most for energy when they're getting phone charging and LEDs. Now we hate to talk about it, off-grid electrification as only being limited in services. We love to talk about mechanical power and so on and so on. I'll leave that for the Q&A session, but because I'm sure some people will bring that up. But if you're an off-grid energy company that doesn't have subsidies and you have to get a return on investment and you've got investors who are demanding you repay their money, you've got to figure out some way to charge enough to repay them while serving your customers. And this is the way to do it. I'm going to talk a little bit about the off-grid market. I don't have as much experience in off-grid Africa. I spent some time living in Nigeria and certainly had a fair share of chances to see some places that were off-grid there. But most of the work, I lived in an off-grid village in Nepal 20-some years ago. But most of the work I've done in rural electrification has been in India. These are some maps that we've put together, and I'd like to just show you what the market in off-grid, what the rural market in India looks like first. And because I think it's important to disaggregate the rural India, and instead of just saying rural India and think that it's homogeneous. It really isn't homogeneous. We need to explain a little bit what these categories are. This is a district in Uttar Pradesh. Uttar Pradesh has 200 and some million people, out of which 100 and some are off-grid. Somewhere around 2% of the world's population is off-grid in the state of Uttar Pradesh. Pretty significant number. It's just east of Delhi. This is the district called Sitapur. What we have here is a town that's called Reusa. You'll notice that it has it's a crossroads. These are two state highways, and they're crossing in this town. The town has about a few thousand people. It's still small. It's rural, certainly. It's got market activity, though, along these highway roads. Level of income is relatively high for what I'm calling rural India, but it's still small. It's something we would call a town when we refer to these areas. Now, if you go up this highway, and this highway is one lane going each direction. To call it 2 lanes is a little bit of a stretch, but it's something that it's a paved road that you can actually drive a car on without having to worry too much about destroying your car. You get to this village right here, now this community right here. It's just off the highway, but it's close enough that the people who live here have access to the town of Reusa, so they can travel to Reusa to do their shopping. They can travel to Reusa if they have a job. They can travel to Reusa if they want to sell things that they've made, sell things that they've grown. They have pretty good access to that town. It's still relatively large. It's not quite as big as Reusa, but it's large enough. Now, if you go off of this road, I'm sorry the map is flickering here, but the further away from this road you go, you see these smaller communities. These are much smaller roads. They're often dirt roads. Traveling to these hamlets is a lot more difficult, takes a lot more time. The people who live in these communities do not travel to the nearest towns or to the highways nearly as frequently because of their distance. And therefore, the poverty level in these communities is far higher. And I'm just going to keep scrolling on this map. And you can see these communities pop up, and there's no highway. There's small roads, there's no highway. You can just keep going, and all you see are these little communities. Now, there's a way to get to these communities by motorbike, by bicycle, by foot. But we're talking about communities that are pretty far away from the highway now. I'm going to show you what this district looks like at a higher level. And explain what these dots mean. Alright. So these dots are what are called panchayats. They're the smallest level of government in India. They, in the case of a town like Reusa we just looked at, Reusa would be its own panchayat. But the more rural you get, each one of those hamlets is not big enough to be its own unit of government. So they cluster these hamlets together. And each one of these rural panchayats is actually a cluster of hamlets. They're color-coded based on electrification rates. The red ones, which you can't see too many of, those have an electrification rate of greater than 20%. The orange ones are between 10 and 20%. The yellow ones are between 5 and 10%. And the blue ones are unelectrified. So these are, we don't have an indication of population yet, but we can see that the electrification further away from these highways is a lot poorer. When you get to the towns that where these roads intersect, you get higher electrification rates. But in between them, there's really poor, really low electrification rates.
Can I ask where you get the untapped data from?
It is the government of India has official electrification data, most of which we don't trust. And I can explain that to you. Actually, I got a tab up here. Might as well just bring it up. Here's the official rural electrification rate in India since 1990. And there's some really nice trends. You got some straight lines here. I mean, this is almost perfectly straight. It's just mechanical how well they were electrifying rural areas these years, right? Of course, you got this dip here, but then it goes back up and it's relatively linear again until you get this bigger dip over here. The problem with these dips is that they are 10 years apart, and anyone know what happens in India every 10 years?
Census.
Census. They actually collect data every 10 years. Everything else is just made up. So the census occurred, they said electrification rate was about 55%. The next year they said it's 75%. So you'll forgive me if I'm not too trusting of government data. Yeah.
How do you define a village with or a hamlet with like 20% electrification compared to 10% with the number of the percentage of the households in those communities that are electrified? Or
So remember it's a panchayat level. So if you have 10 hamlets in that panchayat, and 2 of them electrified, and half of each of those hamlets actually took the service, you're looking at about 10% electrification rate in that panchayat. You still have 8 hamlets that are completely off-grid, and two hamlets which are about half electrified. I'm sorry, did that answer your question?
so I think there's some discrepancy regarding the definition of electrification, the way government defines how
Yep.
villages are electrified
Yep.
compared to how we are doing it here.
Mm-hmm.
So I think
Government determines in an electrified village as any village that has 10% 10% of households electrified. Yeah, yeah.
that's why I was concerned about how do you find villages from this data which are 20% electrified or 5% electrified.
Well, they still have the data of what the actual electrification rate is. So even though they may categorize something as unelectrified or electrified, they still have the figure, approximate figure of electrification within that community. But it's a good question, it's a good point. So when you talk about electrification in India, if you hear someone talk about just that, the electrification, we have 100% electrification in rural villages in India now. According to the government, they've electrified 100% of villages, right? But that doesn't mean that all the households within every village has access to electricity or has electricity. The study you did was with CEW,
Yep.
right? Yeah. So the study from CEW that I mentioned had found that even in villages where the grid is connected, less than half the households would actually take a connection. But it still counts as an electrified village according to the statistics. Yeah. Okay, and so this is these are the types when we were scrolling through and we saw those small communities, those are the communities that we at Mera Gao Power serve. We have a tailored service that's specifically designed for small communities of under 100 households, far from the major roads. It's decentralized. We produce the power within the village. We distribute it to the households within the village. And we then do payment collections as a microfinance institution within those communities. The market size is tremendous. This is just one district. I chose this district because it also has a great market potential for us, and we are really excited about this district. But we have done maps for most of the districts that we have been looking at in Uttar Pradesh, and a lot of them look very similar to this. The market is really tremendous, and the distribution companies cannot reach these communities. And that's an important point. They're really, really difficult for the distribution companies to invest all the money necessary to get to those places, to provide them with that full set of power that we think about when we think about electrification. But that means that a service that's more basic, but still focused on the priorities, is very meaningful to our customers. So I'm going to leave it there for my presentation and then just open it up for questions.
Fantastic. Okay, so I'm gonna change the approach, and I'll let you take the first question.
And it's a very exciting presentation that sets off lots of questions. Given the figures you're looking, is your average charge for a customer something like $30 a month in rural India?
No, we charge $2 a month.
Okay, thanks. So
Yeah.
good. Now, the next thing is, and this is I'm very conscious of as a problem. And the next question is, what technology do you use to do is it petrol powered, or is it solar? Or?
We do solar, and we do solar. What I think makes it really exciting. We don't do solar because we're a green company, because we're trying to display fossil fuels. We do solar because it's the lowest cost means of electrifying communities through our technology.
Well, I guess the other question is there a lower cost factoring in the government of India's subsidies for solar power?
We haven't accessed any of the subsidies for solar power, but in principle, if we could, then yes, we could even drive those costs down.
And then the next question, which I'm very conscious of the problem, and you sort of got to with mobile charger. One of the highest, basically there's some very high community priorities in most of rural India, and fridge actually is one of them, but that's basically for the hospitals or the medical dispensaries, and the government's going to pay for that. But the other one is access to the internet, particularly for young people. And I'm conscious of all these places that they're all on Facebook, saying things like they say here, which they maybe wouldn't like the world to see in 20 years and so forth. But that drinks even more power than a phone if you're talking about serious use.
Yeah.
Are you at all interfaced with efforts to have village cyber cafes, etc.?
So if when I categorize rural India into hamlets, villages, and towns, I think those towns are still rural India, and cyber cafes in those locations make a lot of sense. I think there's enough interest in payment capacity in those communities to do it. In the villages, perhaps. In the hamlets, our average customer earns, and you know, as you and I have talked about this, we are not expert surveyors, but when we've done surveys before, the number we've come up with, a seasonally adjusted average per household income, is about 4,500 rupees, which is about $65 a month for a family of 6. So that's $10 a month per person, about 30 cents a day per person, and very seasonal as well. So we haven't seen the payment capacity for an enterprise of that sort to truly flourish. Plus, these communities are very small. Many of the communities we serve, and you can't really see the size on those maps, many of the communities we serve only have 20 households. And so that creates a challenge for those types of businesses. But in the towns and even some of the villages, cyber cafes could certainly make a lot of sense. And you can still have a cyber cafe in a town which is serving communities that are outside of that town. So that access to
Actually, they typically do, because the prime targets are higher secondary and junior, sort of college students. They're usually located in towns.
Right, that's right. Yeah. There's very few schools in the community. The important thing about mobile phone charging, though, and you mentioned it on internet, but it's actually we think about the phone and think people must be on their phones talking to people all the time. What we've seen from our customers, they need their phone charged so that they can watch movies at night. It is a version of a television for them. They can listen to music when they're out in the field working. They can come home at night and watch a movie. It's a 2.5 inch screen, maybe 3 inch screen sometimes, but they can watch a movie on that phone at night. And when you don't have access to electricity, but you do have access to entertainment, it makes a big difference in your life. So keeping that phone charged is one of the highest priorities. So that's also why they would be willing to pay more for phone charging than lighting, just as you are.
Yes, sir. So how foolproof is your technology? You're using solar, right?
Mm-hmm.
How foolproof is your system? I mean, is it based on location? You got to also look at the where you're servicing. I mean, the temperature and all that stuff. So is it, I don't know, like, does this work everywhere?
No, it would not work. It would not work everywhere. And particularly, it doesn't work as well in North India. In fact, the best places would be in Africa, because in North India there's two seasons that really hurt us being a solar company. One is the monsoon, of course, but the second is the fog season, which is December through February, where a thick fog comes in, and cloud cover doesn't help solar installation. So that makes it more difficult for us. We've had to install excess battery capacity and excess solar capacity in our microgrid that we wouldn't have to if we were doing something in DRC or Haiti or somewhere else.
So basically, your system involves batteries, power storage.
Yep.
And is your power electrification based on residences, or you have a network that feeds multiple residences?
We have one installation per community. The solar panels are on someone's house, and the batteries are stored within that house, and then distribution lines take it across that village so anyone can connect. But the installation is actually only in one location.
Gotcha. The reason why I'm here, I'm affiliated with Nigeria. Possibly in 2019, I probably will be one of the ministers over there.
Okay.
So I'm here to understand how your power is going to work. I know you have good temperature over there and everything.
Yeah. If you were to look at, particularly the Niger Delta, you'd probably face some cloud cover issues. But if you look at northern Nigeria, where the electrification rates are lower and you deal with great sunshine year-round, solar would work really well. I'm not going to go to northern Nigeria anytime soon, but yeah, the solution would work. And in fact, there are a few microgrid companies or mini grid companies in Nigeria that are starting up that I think would be great. I can see what I can find in terms of contacts, but I'd love to introduce you to them. I'm sure that they would love to know a future minister.
Definitely, because I think next year when all these laws change, we're going to be doing a lot of stuff, and a lot of subsidies, a lot of new laws. So a lot of people might not be able to do this, but the technology, I'm an engineer, so the technology is what I'm trying to look into. We want something foolproof, no downtime, green, of course. All right, so I'll talk with you later.
Yeah, I think if you're looking at subsidized installations, then, I mean, our system was designed because we didn't expect subsidies. But if you do expect subsidies, you can build something larger, and probably would be something you'd be looking for. I'd be happy to try and introduce you to some people.
Thank you.
You've been holding your hand up for a while.
Yeah, I'm just wondering, is your particular model considered an interim model? I mean, I'm wondering how what you're offering people fits into the statistics of energy access. Is it considered an interim model? And are you do you work with the government, showing them what you're doing? I'm just wondering how it all fits into the bigger picture of getting full access for people.
Well, regarding government, we, as I said, we designed this not with the intention of having to avoid dealing with government, because our experience, no offense intended, my experience in Nigeria led me to believe that if I could do something without having to work with government, I'd be better off. And I found the same thing to be in India. If I had to rely on the government to do something, I would be stuck for much of the time, just waiting for documents to be signed. So we do like to interact with the government, let them know what we're doing. The government of India doesn't have any clear definition of what electrification is. Internationally, there are multiple tiers, tier 0, tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 that you can look at, and we're on the lower end of that, certainly. If you want to call it interim, you could call it interim until something better comes along, but that something better is either going to have to be subsidized, which means the government's going to have to start providing those subsidies, or our customers are going to have to get significantly richer to pay for it. Because as I said, there's three models we figured out. One is to do what we're doing, one is to charge our customers more, and one is to get subsidies. So if it's going to be a higher level, it's going to be one of those other two. And those two other options seem a long way away. You guys are scientists. What do they say about the long run?
We roll dead.
Yes.
I got 3 questions. One of them built up her question is that it's good that you have an off-grid solution right now, but what if in the future you connect all these little harlots or whatever you call them into the main centralized system? Is there like a particular voltage that you have in mind? Because I know that in the U.S. they try to develop some sort of standard so that you can kind of build, it's like a building block, and then you can connect to the grid later. That's one question. Second question is, building off on your last point of your presentation, how do you go in and determine demand? Not how much they're willing to pay, but how much demand that it makes sense. And then the third question is, I know that the government of India also interested in replacing a lot of water pumps with solar. I know you said you don't like to work with government, but is there kind of like some sort of collaboration going on with it?
All right. First question, now you have to remind me of questions again.
The voltage.
Voltage, right. Yeah, there's been a lot of talk about grid connected or grid ready microgrids or mini grids in India, and the need to be and it technically makes a lot of sense. Technically, I'm in charge of a business, so I have to look at the financial side of it. And unfortunately, the cost, our microgrid for up to 30 households, we can connect up to 30 households for $900. So that's panels, batteries, wires, lights, installation costs, labor, taxes, transport, everything. The cost of putting in infrastructure to allow us to be grid connected is a few $1,000s. So our cost goes up by a multiple if we want to be grid connected ready. And it just doesn't make sense from a financial standpoint to put that money in. Our grids are distributing power at 24 volt DC. Because we're only doing lighting phone charging, we can get away with lower voltage in DC distribution, which would make it's another challenge for connecting to the grid. I think there's a possibility of us receiving power from the grid if the grid were present, or we simply buy from them. But in terms of feeding in our power generation into the grid, I think it would be very difficult and not economic. Question 2.
Market. How do you do determine demand?
Right. Okay, so we've designed our system, our service, to be widely demanded. And we spent the first few years trying to figure out what can we offer that almost everyone will want, so that we don't have to do a lot of village level design work. And so the lighting, phone charging. I mean, this works here, and it works in one village in India. You can imagine it's going to work pretty broadly. And it does. It's pretty broadly demanded when we focus on these services. We could, in one community, we might be able to get a few people hooked up to a fan. There might be in some communities someone wants a fridge, but if we were to design a tailor designed microgrid for every community, it would be very, very difficult to scale. And this is the business that operates at scale. I mean, it's profitable at scale, not with a few microgrids. So we need to have that service that's going to be that we can walk into and know that by within a few hours, someone who's doing a marketing campaign can have 10 customers signed up, 15 customers signed up. So it's designed to do that, and that's largely what it does. And question number 3.
The water pump.
Water pumps.
Yeah.
Yes, we do know that there's a big program coming out for subsidizing solar water pumps. We have been working with some companies that are interested in participating. I think our role would simply be providing rural infrastructure operations and not being a direct line of contact with the government.
Hi, my name is Ritika and I'm from India as well. So my question is, which process or physical technology do you consider to be MGP's competitor? Or how do you see MGP growing forward or like moving forward in the next 2 to 3 or 5 years time frame? Yeah.
So our competitor, we consider Kerosene to be our competitor. The other companies that work in this space, I said that there's 3 models, right? One is limited service, one is getting subsidies, and one is passing on the price to customers. Both those 2 other business models are actually pretty closely related, because what a lot of mini grid companies, and I distinguish between mini and microgrids. Mini grids are bigger than microgrids. A lot of mini grid companies, their goal is to eventually be receiving government subsidies in the long run. And so their aim is to use equity to finance projects which create a track record, a proven performance record, so that they can take to the government and say, see, we've been doing this, we're credible, give us money now. But either way, they're building in these larger systems that require customers that are going to purchase more power. In the short run, they're probably going to be charging those true commercial rates for it. And those customers don't live in the communities we serve. When we look at these maps, those customers, the customers that can afford that higher end service are in closer to the town of Reusa or in these villages, right? What's this? Whatever that is, that's these ones. Okay, so the customers that can afford unsubsidized but large-scale power, they're looking at somewhere in the area of $10 a month to $10, $15 a month for service. They're going to live in these towns where there's more commercial activity. So they might have a shop, they might work at a shop. There's more activity, more options for them to earn money, and therefore they can afford the higher priced electricity. But as I said, even in sub-Saharan Africa, only 25% of off-grid households can afford subsidized power. So we're people who can afford truly private sector delivered commercial rate power. It's a very small subset of the off-grid population.
Sorry.
The obvious question is, you mentioned that, I'm sorry, did somebody else? What you forget? Just saying, you were talking about not taking government subsidies, but I would have thought that there were a lot of non-profit, local level customers, and they do tend to be more than the $10 thing you mentioned. There are a bunch of mosques. Mosques need to be illuminated at night for the two last prayers, temples, schools. Are those potential customers for you, or do they mostly have enough money to have their own generators?
That's a good question. We do not see schools in the communities we serve. They're too small. There are some very local mosques, usually community funded, very small, and then we will oftentimes provide, someone will offer to pay for the connection for the mosque. And so we do provide connections to them, but they're not well endowed, financially strong institutions that could pay higher levels of power. Those communities do exist, and they're more in the villages or in the towns, and therefore there's a distinction between payment capacity in these three levels of communities.
What's the reason that people cancel your subscription? I mean, is it always about price, or have you come across in your experience that people have complained about quality also?
Yeah, well, we're we're still a startup, and we're actually old enough that we perhaps shouldn't be, but it's a business model that hasn't been done before, so it takes a long time to perfect it, and I wouldn't say we've perfected it yet. So there's seasonality. I mentioned monsoon and fog season, but we have a very rural workforce. We hire staff in the same communities we serve. They've never done electrical work before. So we have to train them and then monitor them to make sure they're doing their work. We have to train the construction staff to make sure they're building the microgrids per spec. If everything goes perfectly and smoothly and as they should, there's no problems. But it's not always that case.
So I had a bunch of follow-up questions, but now I'm moving away from that. But so my question is, I'm personally smitten by the pay-as-you-go technology and solar home systems, and I'm kind of now curious, where do you see Sitapur or India fitting into that sort of technology? Because to the best of my knowledge, I believe Bago has done exemplary well in sub-Saharan Africa, especially in the East African region. So I just wanted to hear your thoughts on that.
There's a few points to make. First, East Africa is, of all portions of sub-Saharan Africa, if you wanted to work East Africa, it's by far the easiest. I mean, I don't know if you've spent time in East Africa, but West Africa. You're right. I know, but have you spent time in East Africa?
No, never been there.
So, I mean, there's a reason that not many companies have been working in Nigeria. It's just more of a recent trend. Every company that started in Africa started in Tanzania or Kenya. And there's a reason. One is the payment capacity. There are some other things about doing business in those countries, but the payment capacity is one of them. Second thing to point out about the companies that have done really well, most of them have done really well at raising money. There is a big challenge on collecting money. And a consultant had looked at all the solar home system companies, found that if these companies would project and say, look, our customers are going to want this service, they're going to pay $2,000, whatever it'd be, $100 up front, and then $10 a month. They're actually paying about $450 a month on average moving forward. So less than half of what they anticipate getting in revenue. So that means that their payback periods are actually much larger than they had originally anticipated. Not to say that it's unresolvable or makes the model bad, but there are some things to be clear about that. The other thing is that it does, if you're doing a household level installation with a pay-as-you-go meter, your capital cost per household is a lot higher, and that means you have to extend that price onto the customer. So that, again, shifts you to a different part of the market. There are pay-as-you-go solar home system companies in India. When I look at these three categories of rural India, the towns are perfect for mini grids, the villages are perfect for solar home systems, and the hamlets are perfect for microgrids, non-pay-as-you-go microgrids, just because of cost.
Yeah, I have a couple of questions. What is the minimum population concentration that justifies you'll be breaking even, and at a consolidated level, what is the payback period? I mean, the time to which at least you start making operating profit, not the net profit per se. If, say, for instance, a population concentration of 200 households is there in an area which is maybe like a kilometer or two away from the highways.
The smallest community we'd serve would be about 20 households. We would need to at least have 10 households as customers, and we would want them within 90 meters of our solar installation. At that point, our payback period is under 5 years on operating profit level. It's under 5 years. If we can get the numbers up and build larger installations, of course, there's greater efficiencies, and we can. I mean, projected that down the road we can get it down to under 3 years.
And how quickly you are able to install your systems in place, so that if you get a mandate from a village panchayat, for example, to install a system,
about 8 hours. Yeah. So the team will arrive about 9 a.m. with a truck. Truck offloads all the equipment, and by 5 p.m. households are connected, and that night they receive service.
How do you enforce, well, based on your investment, how do you make sure that the people that buy into that system are constant on your payroll? I mean, how do you make sure that they are?
Ensure that they pay?
Yeah.
We do microfinance type collections. Microfinance has shown a very strong ability to get high payment collections from rural communities. Our collections are very small. We charge 50 cents a week, basically. So that makes it a little bit more difficult than a microfinance institution, which might be charging or collecting from customers $10, $15 per payment session. But it's still a sufficiently strong solution for getting high payment collection rates from our customers. Still work to do to get that higher, but certainly we're above that 45% level by vastly higher than that 45% level for solar home system installation. We do have a prepaid meter that we have developed. We've deployed some of them, and we're testing to see if it has any impact on the collection ratio. But we have to also consider the additional cost of installing the meter in the house. So there's a few considerations. But if you have even 80% collection efficiency, it's probably better than getting 95% collection efficiency with the meter because of the requirements to pay back the meter cost. Yeah.
Any clients are in Nigeria? Like, do you have any installation with it?
We do not. No, we were thinking about it at one point, but no. We're right now we're trying to get things right in India. So. But I do know that there's at least a few companies, and one of which I've met, so I will try and find out the names and link you up with any people I can. I met a metering company and a platform for mini grids. Met their founder 2 days ago. He's very interested in Nigeria. So another connection I can make.
So this is all very exciting. I'm wondering what are the internal or external impediments that are slowing the growth of your technology across the country?
Human resources and finance. We are still a bit to negative, so we need to get up to about 40,000 customers to be a bit to positive. So getting enough money to finance our expansion is a big challenge. It's always been a challenge. We've struggled with raising enough money and spent of our operational period, we've probably spent at least half of it without any money, just trying to figure out how to pay the next month payroll until we can get some investment in. So that's always been a hindrance in HR. We hire, as I said, people from rural areas, making sure that they are trained and retained.
And who tends to finance this, like angel investors or?
There's a lot of impact investors. Most of them are from Europe.
On the finance side, have you had any experience with World Bank financial intermediaries who are supposed to be targeting this type of investment? Have you had any experience with that?
We've not had good experiences. No, the World Bank and many of the larger players are looking at the larger installations that are not targeting core needs, but providing kind of unlimited power. There's a lot of talk about mechanical power, providing mechanical power within communities so that they can start businesses. We've seen in World Bank publications justification for why that doesn't make any sense, but that's our read of their data. So
I have one question. Have you seen any impact from the Saubhagya scheme on demand for your service?
yes. So for those of you who don't know, Saubhagya scheme is a recent push by the government because there's an election next year. There's a recent push to provide more electricity into rural areas. And for the most part, they are, the newly connected customers are either not paying or not being forced to pay, even if they're told they're supposed to. But there's been a lot of infrastructure that's been pushed out. We found that when we have kind of had 3 phases of growth over the past few years. One is Seaport, where we started, which is a great space. We've not seen much impact in Seaport from the Saubhagya scheme. But it's also where we did our commercial pilots and basically started building microgrids when we didn't know how to build a microgrid, never mind how to operate a microgrid. We've had another district, Gonda, which in hindsight, if we had had this data, we never would have gone to because it was already pretty well electrified, and we've seen a lot of impact in that district and the surrounding, the kind of the border areas to that district. But our core market is still largely intact. But yes, we have seen either villages electrified or villages thinking they're going to get electrified.
I just wonder, from where do you get the solar panels or other tools? Do you import, or do you have any correlation with local companies?
Yeah, we've now gotten to the point where we're buying everything local. No, it's not quite true. We buy our charge controllers from China, but I think we started buying charge controllers, LEDs, and a few other components from China. But we've tried as hard as possible to get local suppliers in India. Just because when there's a problem, it's easier. Getting things in and out of India is not that easy, and moving them within India is also not that easy. It used to be the case that it was easier to get things from Beijing to Delhi than it was from Delhi to Lucknow. But it's gotten a little bit easier since. But it's still hard to deal with that interstate transport and certainly international transport. Anytime you try and send something out of India, then the government starts wondering why, and you have to fill out paperwork and etc. I generally don't like to fill out a lot of paperwork, so we've tried as hard as we can to find local suppliers. And at this point, we have local suppliers for everything. We still choose our charge controller supplier out of China just because of quality and features, but we do have suppliers for everything in India.
question on the financing part, because just now you mentioned that most of your financiers cannot impact investors from Europe. Just questions like, is there a reason you attract European impact investors? Because here in the US, they talk a lot about impact investing. You know, there are a lot of foundations, a lot of banks they talk about, and then also in Asia, for example, in Singapore, in Hong Kong, they also talk about impact investing. So, are there any experiences when you talk with attract the European investors, and then hard to attract US or other countries? Is there anything?
I've always wondered why I haven't been able to attract any capital from the US, being that I'm American, but for some reason I have not been able to. All of our contacts and all of the leads have all come from Europe. We have worked with an entity in Singapore called Impact Investment Exchange that does that's doing some really exciting stuff, even putting stuff up on the Singapore Stock Exchange. But there's there's still a certain risk appetite that they are willing to take on, and an unproven business model is still something that's of a challenge for them to get around. But yeah, we're hoping that over time that would be a real possibility.
Any more questions? Still have time for 1 or 2 weeks. Okay, let's.
I'm still asking about this one. Do you have any experience working with ADB? Because ADB does quite a bit of private financing, unlike the World Bank, which does government-based financing. And I think I was looking for some data, but
We've had some communications with them, never gotten very far in terms of investment deals. They've invested in one company that I know of in India, which is Simpa Networks, and so that's a unique deal. There's been a number of unique deals where the financiers have come back saying we did this one thing and we're not going to do it again, and that was one of them. IFC invested in Hus Power Systems and also said that was a unique one-time thing. We haven't been the one-timer, unfortunately. We would have loved to have been someone's one-timer.
would you want to share what's been their experience? Why would they not want to do it again?
Well, they're looking for a certain scale of projects, a certain, generally what happens when you're looking at energy, when you're looking to finance an energy project, you're looking to build off of an experience that's multiple decades old, right? So it's easy to finance a coal power plant because coal power plants have been operated for multiple decades, and you have this track record that says this technology will work. In order to make the project commercially financeable, you have to have your supplier agreement in place, you have to have your power purchase agreement in place, you have to have your EPC contract, your O&M contract, you do your environmental impact assessment. There's a checklist. It doesn't take any real knowledge to finance a coal power plant anymore, because you can look it up and it's a checklist. You just follow the checklist and you're done. With an off-grid energy company where there is no history to look back and say solar power plants in rural communities, what's the checklist of things to make sure are in place, and then you're guaranteed success, there is no such checklist. So it becomes a lot more difficult for a typical financier, which is not an industry expert, to be able to understand the business model well enough to assess risk. And so usually if you can't assess risk, you assume the risk is high. Great. Thank you all. I appreciate you taking the time to listen and all the questions. It was great questions.